It's really a privilege to introduce Jim Ellis to you again and hear from him on a more extended basis than last night. As many of you, I'm sure, know, Jim has a very distinguished career in the Canadian Army, completing his military service as a colonel and serving in a number of important missions abroad. After that time, he joined the public service and has served as the Deputy Minister for Environment and the Deputy Minister for Energy before becoming the CEO of the Alberta Energy Regulator. So it's a great privilege and pleasure to introduce Jim Ellis.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks very much, and welcome again. I spoke to a few of you weren't here last night. I took a couple of minutes to try to situate what we're doing here. This morning I'm going to get a little deeper on the AER, why we've asked UPenn to help us on this move to becoming a best-in-class regulator. I'll stand in one place. I made this comment to a couple of folks, and I've heard this before. When I speak for normally 45 minutes on the minute, and I don't move. And it's because I've sat in observation posts for days on end, looking at something that never happened. And so you'll see that I don't move around. But back then, I had ammo in the weapon. These days, I don't have that anymore. But and again, thanks very much for coming. For those that were here last night, for the rest of you here today and tomorrow, it's very important for us as the regulator to have the opportunity to meet with you. It's going to be a busy couple of days. We'll move through quite sharply today, and we'll be done at noon tomorrow. I know there's a number of folks that are flying out, so we're going to hold to those timings. These events are really, really important to us as the AER. We've found in the past, and as Kerry alluded to, I had the privilege of being an ADM of operations in environment, which was overseeing that large environmental regulator back in, I think, 2006, 2007, and then the deputy minister of that department for about 4 years, and then moved over to energy, and I've come here. What I found in the past when we used to do consultation was it was very specific to an issue, and a very tight issue. And some, quite frankly, would say that that's probably drive-by consultation. And in many cases, I'd have to admit that that's what it was. We got a list. We were going to be asked by our ministers or cabinet, did you consult? Yes, of course we consulted. We just drove by. Luckily, there was nobody there when we drove by, and so we got all the information that we wanted. Quite frankly, those days are done, and these sorts of events are very important to us. We have our critically important Alberta stakeholders here. Our First Nation and Métis communities are with us here today, and as I said last week, we had the opportunity 4 weeks ago, up in Edmonton to have an Aboriginal day with those folks to help us understand their perspective and to listen to them as an important part of our province. I want to start today by kind of reminding you of where we were, where we are right now, and how we got here. I'm often fascinated when we're moving nationally and internationally that a lot of folks don't really know who we are in Alberta, and I'm okay with that. Nationally, I'm a little concerned about it. Internationally, it is what it is. We're spent a lot of time in Washington and other areas in the UK and places like that. People don't know about the Alberta Energy Regulator. They don't know about regulators in this province, and that's okay. It just means that we have to get out more and do a better job of that. What I'm always surprised about, though, is within our own province, many people still don't have a good understanding of who we are, and more importantly, how we got here. So as a little reminder, a little bit of a history, back in 2010, the International Energy Agency did a report. They do a country report every 5 years. Our next report for Canada is due in 2015, and the AER sat with that group the IEA at Paris. They brought a big team in here last year, sat with them, did major discussions on where we're going with hydrocarbon regulatory oversight. And they're fascinated not only with what we're doing, but the governance structure that we have in this regulator right now, and I'll talk about that in a second. But in 2010, and remember where we were at the depths of an international recession. We had all kinds of issues all over the country, but certainly within the province. Slowdowns in energy development, the budget was in trouble. Sounds a little familiar, I suppose, to some of us again. But one of the comments that came out of there was that entity looked at the regulatory oversight of hydrocarbon development in Canada, but really focused on Alberta because it was and remains one of the leader in hydrocarbon development in the country. Their comments were not, I wouldn't say they were critical, but they certainly weren't supportive. And some of the things they talked about where you had too many regulators, the regulators didn't speak to one another, the system was opaque, nobody knew how to move through it, industry didn't know how to do it, stakeholders, First Nations, Métis, didn't understand how the system worked, and therefore there was a significant amount of frustration, and because of all of that, you're not competitive. And we're on the international stage. We were trying to, at that point, I was a deputy trying to incent investment into the province. If you don't have a regulatory system, first of all, that's competitive, and second of all, that's understood by those people that are living here and that are trying to invest here, you've got a problem. So as a result of that, the government, under the leadership of Diana McQueen, not a minister anymore, she's out doing her thing, but at the time was an MLA, led an MLA task force supported by 3 deputy ministers. I was one of them out of the Environment Department to take a look at what we could do. The MLAs developed what was called the Enhancing Assurance, and in that they came up with 6 recommendations. I won't go all through 6. 2 of them involved developing a single regulator. The second one was a policy management office. And in the priority, which was surprising to me, policy management and coordination was the #1 thing that Albertans, all stakeholders, and First Nations and Métis identified that this was critical for Alberta. And I was quite surprised because I thought it was going to be the regulatory system. We have obviously developed and implemented the new AER as the single regulator, and I'll walk you through that. But the Policy Management Office is up and running. Its role is to make sure that policy at the government level is integrated, so that policy makers, be it environment, SRD, the First Nation, the Aboriginal Relations Department, that their policies are integrated, and at least those policy people are sitting together and dialoguing, because I have to tell you, I've got significant experience. Not only didn't we speak to our fellow departments in the ERCB on the regulatory side, we did very, very little dialogue between departments when we were developing policy, and that policy would pop out without that coordination and cause huge, huge problems. So we're up and running right now. Where's Al? Al Sanderson, sitting there, is the executive in charge of that. He's a chief ADM in energy, but has that role to coordinate that. So he does coordination of policy at the government level. He is also required to assure that that policy is implemented by the regulator. That's us. And so he and his team work closely with us to make sure as the policy comes through that we implement it with the outcomes that the government directed. And also, very important to us as regulators, he is responsible to help us go back into government when we identify there's a policy gap on the ground. And that happens all the time. So that's a new part of the system, and it works very well. The second piece was obviously the development of the single regulator, and that's the Alberta Energy Regulator. In December of 2012, the Responsible Energy Development Act was passed in government. That basically set up the regulator. We became live on the 17th of June 2013, and we started the stand-up of the regulator at that time. We completed the merger of 3 regulators on the 31st of March 2014. So we really have only been in play as a full regulator for about just a little bit over a year. This was a merger of 3 strong regulators: environment, SRD, and the ERCB. And as I said, we did a merger, was really a lift and shift, or a shift and lift, whatever way you want to say it, to a new regulator. This was not an acquisition of environment or SRD or the ERCB. This is a completely different regulator. And you're starting to see, and we're starting to hear people recognize this. But as I said, this was directed, and we have delivered on all the timelines that we were asked to do by government. This took place, and those folks in industry and the other folks that were looking at this took place, this merger, over one of the busiest periods in this province. We had more applications that we've ever seen before. They came in over what's called the winter drilling season, which is really November until about February, March. So November of 2013 to February, March of 2014. This was a period when I've talked to many folks before and said in my personal leadership career, although I've led under fire in too many places overseas, this was the most difficult leadership challenge I've ever faced. And it's because we were trying to merge these elements together. We were trying to do all of this work, and it was under provincial, national, and international scrutiny. Every move that we were making, everybody had a comment on, and everybody was watching. This was, as I said, an interesting period, and I would say that stakeholders around the world and folks around the world were interested, but they were really scrutinizing what we were doing. People in the private sector, and a number of you are here today, will recognize that mergers take time. And I find it interesting and humorous, I suppose, at times, that we'd often be told by not just by industry, but also by landowners and municipalities and First Nations and Métis would say, look, you're supposed to do this stuff. You've been in place for 6 months. Where's this brand new system you're going to run? Where's the new consultation system? Where's the new application system? And we don't see a lot of change right now. What we had to explain is it takes a little time to merge 3 completely different cultures, and that's what we have right now. And if you take a look at the experts that have done this before, it takes between 6 and 8 years to actually merge and change culture. So we're just in the initial stages of that. We started off with rebranding. We moved people around. We gave people new equipment, new badges, and new identity. But the culture is going to take us a little longer than you think. And we're involved right now in a major effort on change management and culture change within the regulator. And it's going to take time. As I said, 6 to 8 years is an interesting target. We don't have anywhere near that time, quite frankly. And so we're accelerating through this period. And if there's any silver lining to a downturn in the price of oil right now, we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in part of our work. I'll tell you, we're just accelerating and moving some of those people along to accelerate our change and our change management. We talk a lot, as an example, about risk-based regulation and risk-based decision-making. It's a great tagline. It's a great aspirational target, and we're moving towards it, and we are building a system that's all about risk-based. That's where we're going. But I've got to tell you, when you take regulators that were born and bred in a world when risk was not acceptable, when decisions that were made, there was no room for error, and so everything had to be managed to zero risk, which means it's slower. You actually take your regulators and focus them on low to medium risk when they should be focused on medium to high risk. The system and the culture that we're trying to change, we have to recognize that back in the day, and some of you were involved with that, people were fired in some of these regulators for making decisions that were incorrect. So we're trying to break through a culture and try to support people to say, take a risk-based approach to making decisions, use your discretion. When things don't look right, then you need to have more flexibility to move. And it's an example I give just because it sounds easy. It's not easy when you take a look at folks that are actually trying to do this. A little bit about what we regulate, because I think that's important. You would think that all of you know this, but I'm going to tell you right now, I think a number of you may not know the size and the scope of what we regulate in this province. We regulate the full life cycle development of all hydrocarbon production in Alberta. In the good old days when I was in environment, when things didn't go well in environment, I could blame SRD and blame the ERCB, and I did it often. Now, I can't blame anyone, so I just have to look internally and blame the EVPs, because there's lots of room to blame those folks. But in the world right now, we are the single regulator. There's nobody else that does this. We regulate oil sands, we regulate conventional oil and gas, unconventional oil and gas, and coal, the whole aspect. We regulate from exploration through to operations to closure. We do the whole thing. We are responsible, and I'll read this, we're responsible for the oversight of 421,000 kilometers of pipeline. Okay. For example, the the NEB regulates large pipe, probably about a quarter of that. We regulate, as I said, over 420,000 kilometers of pipeline, 178,000 operating natural gas and oil wells. And you can imagine the number of suspended and abandoned in this province, and that's another aspect we're working on. But 178,000 operating, 50,000 oil and gas facilities in this province, 785 gas processing facilities, 200 primary enhanced recovery, 50 in situ sites, large in situ sites, 11 producing coal mines, 9 large oil sands mines, 5 bitumen upgraders, and 4 coal processing plants. This is more than most countries. The vast majority of countries in the world don't have this amount of activity. We're a sub-national in Alberta. We have significant activity here. As I mentioned, we have merged over the last 2 years 3 strong regulators that trace their history back. ERCB, 76 years, Environment over 50 years, the SRD, somewhere in the 50 to 60 year period. They have a long history of being outstanding regulators. So we were lucky that we started this AER shift with very strong base, but we have a lot to do and a long way to go to be a best-in-class regulator. Energy regulation is a global concern, and the critical role of the regulator is now starting to be seen. And it's very interesting for me as an example. I took this opportunity not to be a quiet local regulator in Alberta. I took it because when I was in the DOE and in environment, we were asked around the world, what is the regulatory system within Alberta? What's the performance of industry? What's the oversight of the regulator? How do you move through the regulatory system? All of these questions were asked internationally, not just within the province, and I found it quite interesting. We've had over 50 delegations visit us last year from all over the world, Kurdistan, Eastern Europe, Asia, UK, Mexico, Central America, any place you can think, small islands, big countries. They've come to visit us to take a look at our governance structure and take a look at how we regulate. And what we've heard from them is that they view us in Alberta as a center of excellence for hydrocarbon development. And if you take a look at what's going on around the world right now, many of these countries are taking a look at their unconventional opportunities. And for them, it's about fracking and those sorts of things. So they look at us as being a regulator with a very unique governance structure, and the fact that we've been regulating for half a century in how we do business. Do we have it all right? We don't. We have a long way to go. And I want to talk about our challenges here in a second. On the governance side, we have a unique governance structure. It is probably unique from anywhere else in the world for regulators. We have a part-time group of directors in our governance board, led by a chair and with 8 directors. These are part-time individuals, experts in governance. They have oversight of no operational. So if you sit down with those directors, they'll have a general understanding because I brief them every board meeting, but they have no role in operations whatsoever. They're like a public-private sector board. That's what their role is, oversight of governance for us. We also have a group of hearing commissioners. This group of hearing commissioners are like judges. You've seen them before. They run our hearings, led by a chief hearing commissioner, Alex Bolton. These folks take our very difficult applications that we're moving through, and they will run public hearings for us, and they'll send the recommendations back into the main regulator. I'm the CEO and president of the AER. I run the main regulator. We do, I don't know, the figures are all over the place, 60,000 roughly applications a year. We have full oversight of operations, and we run the full life cycle. Over 1,200 employees, $250 million in our budget. I will tell you there was a little confusion in the media. This is not funded by public. This is still a levy that industry pays 100% of our budget. The way that it works, just so you know, I as the I almost said deputy because it's the same. We have to go back to government. Government agrees with our budget, and we levy industry. So it's not the CEO of the Tin Cup moving downtown Calgary asking for money. This actually is me going to, just like I had to do as a deputy minister, going to government and treasury board and explaining what our budget needs to do. It gets approved there, and then we just tax industry. So industry doesn't have a say in our budget. Challenges. As I mentioned, whether we like it or not, Alberta is on the international stage. We want to be an international global energy producer. If you're going to do that, you're going to be on the international stage, and you're going to be held accountable for that. If you're interested in history and you take a look at turning points for us, before 2008, the government of Alberta and industry were doing a lot of work trying to explain to the world that on the oil sands file, oil sands was an opportunity for investment. Difficult, high cost, but it was a place that you want to take a look to invest. 2008, I get the date wrong, March or April, 1,800 ducks hit a tailings pond in northern Alberta. The entire lives of the government, of the regulators changed. We got dragged on the international stage kicking and screaming, and we're never going to come off. So we might as well just get used to the fact that we're being held accountable for our operational performance, not just the standard around the world. We're being held to another standard above that. And it is what it is. And as I tell regulators and policymakers in this province, we might as well just get over it, stop complaining about it. It is what it is. We need to step up, and we need to do a better job. And this is part of this best-in-class work that we're working on. The world has also changed on us. Back in 2008, it used to be just good enough to be a good local regulator, right? Just make sure you've got some talented people that can get on the ground, make sure that the operations were handled efficiently and effectively, make sure that you're protecting the environment, safety, all of that was good. Orders going into the regulators of that day was, if nobody knows about you, you're probably doing a good job. Right? If they don't know there's a regulator, you're probably doing a good job. And for God's sakes, stay out of the media. Don't tell anybody what you're doing. Don't be in the media. That's not the place for a regulator to be. That was then. The world has completely changed on us. The regulator, this regulator in this province at this time and going into the future must be seen to regulate. We have to be seen to be regulating. And it's all about gaining and maintaining trust and credibility with all of our stakeholders, our First Nations and our Métis communities. It's critically important that we get that, and I've got to tell you, we don't have that completely right now, and again, it signals where we're going with this project. Our world as a regulator is about making decisions and integrating the concerns of those distinct, diverse groups that are watching and want an impact or input on what we're doing. We have to make tough decisions. We make tough decisions every single day. We have to enforce the rules. We have to promote development for the benefit of all Albertans. And if you take a look at that, you're talking about protecting the environment, you're talking about protecting safety. We all live, work, and play, all of us, in close proximity to energy development. That's what we do as a regulator. We have to look after the social aspects of those folks that are living in and around those opportunities. and we have to promote the economic benefits for Albertans. And what I'll tell you, and I think all of you are seeing, the recent downturn in oil is impacting the entire country. This has a bit of a silver lining to it. A lot of folks have been trying to explain to Central and Eastern Canada the positive impacts of the development in Western Canada. They're seeing it in a real negative way right now. So all of this actually, for us, involves economic opportunities for Alberta and more for all of Canada. All of this is done in a world that's moving faster than ever before. Public expectation on transparent data, clear and understandable science has never been greater. It's a real challenge for us, and we can talk about it throughout the next couple of days. Information, activities on the ground can move with light speed. Somebody with a camera on a cell phone can take a picture of something that happens in Alberta, and it will go global. What happened in 2008, and I tell this story, I was in the Environment Ops Center for 48 hours straight. It actually reminded me of days gone by, trying to manage what was going on up with that tailings pond. I got an email, a personal email from a friend of mine, an American commander in the Middle East, that said, "We've just heard that," it was even more joking, that as a former commander, they couldn't believe I was running the environment department, and it didn't surprise them that there was a major disaster that had happened under my watch. It's what my mother-in-law told me too. She didn't think I knew what I was doing. But anyways, it's a side story. But when I asked him, I said, "Look, did you get this through piped Canadian news?" Because Canadian news moves to the Middle East for the troops that are there. He said, "No, this was in Arabic on Al Jazeera." That's where he picked it up. And it was 24 hours after the event, and they said there was a major environmental disaster in northern Canada. That's what the article was about. So that moved in 24 hours, and this is what I said, stuff is moving extremely quickly. So the expectations on us have never been higher. For us to be able to get out in front and to be transparent and moving and trying to give folks in Alberta and more so and as much across the country and internationally the trust that they know that we're regulating. As I said, our engagement with Alberta stakeholders, First Nations and Métis, we recognize as a regulator, this is critical. This sort of activity never happened before. This is new for us as a regulator. Normally, as I said before, we would invite individual groups in to talk about pieces that we're working on, bringing a diverse group like this to actually listen, and this is what we're trying to do here. Listen to your advice and what you need to see in a regulator, in your regulator. We talk about we're Alberta's regulator, and we're very proud of that, and we're very committed to that. That's why we're doing this. And again, I'll say it again, this is not drive-by consultation. We need to listen to you and your advice. One of the key changes that we made when we first took off in probably May, I came in as an acting CEO in May of 2013. We immediately stood up and started to move on the Stakeholder and Government Relations Division, led by Executive Vice President Jennifer Stieber. I'm not sure where she is. Jennifer's in the back. Jennifer she runs that SGR division. She is a powerful influencer on the executive management team. All right, so this is taking this responsibility for stakeholder and government relations and moving it very high up into our organization. I'll tell you, in the government departments, they don't do it. In the old regulators, they didn't do it. This is now it's so important to us. We put a focus on it. We work really hard to make sure it's not a siloed piece, and it's not. It really plugs in to the matrixed approach. We have a branch within there that deals specifically with our Alberta stakeholders, First Nation and Métis. That's led by a vice president. She overwatches that, and that's a new piece. I know it's not big enough. I know it doesn't have enough money. I know that it's heavily worked and heavily overworked. Okay, and I get that all the time from them, and I get it all the time from folks in Alberta. We get it, but we've made the move, and we're committed to making this work, and we will make it work. It's a work in progress, though, and it's a start. We have a government relations branch for the industry. This is not a typical GR group. They're not lobbyists or anything else. What they are, in fact, these are the policy people that sit in Edmonton. They actually, a large number of them, they're not a big group, work mostly out of Edmonton. So there's an office of the AER in Edmonton. Their job is to liaise and link in to those government departments that are doing natural resource policy development, because you need to make sure the regulators at every stage of policy development so that we can implement it. We also have a national-international branch. This strengthens our relationships in Canada and abroad. As I mentioned, we've been moving all over the world. We have MOUs right now with British Columbia. We have regulators that are just coming out of the Northwest Territories right now. They were embedded in Yellowknife, in and out, helping that regulator build its capacity. You saw that they took over responsibility for development of the resources from the federal government last year. So we've been working hand in glove with them. And we learned from both of those entities, it's not just us feeding in. We learn a significant amount from them as well. BC's been in the game for a long time, and they know what they're doing. Northwest Territories has a really unique way of dealing with their stakeholders and their Aboriginal communities that we can learn from. So it's really a double-edged sword. We have MOUs outside of the country. We have an MOU with the country of Mexico right now. Remember, we're a subnational province in Canada. We have an MOU through the federal government in Mexico with its regulator. That's up and running, and we're dealing with them right now. We also have MOUs with institutions like Deltaris out of the Netherlands. We're also members of the Western Regulatory Forum. That's Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Alberta, and the National Energy Board. This is an effort to learn best practices, to take and learn the lessons learned, don't just observe them, and to improve our technical information amongst regulators. And that happens at home and abroad. Very quickly, a bit on where we're going. We're going to continue to move forward on the challenges that I talked about. We're going to continue to move forward on the change management initiatives, including the culture. That is the critical piece for us. And as I said, and I'm repeating myself, it takes a lot of hard work to change the culture and have staff understand it's okay to move to a different way of regulating. Everything we're doing is driven by our strategy. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I encourage you to take a look at this. It has 4 main priorities, or military terminology is lines of operation leading to a strategic outcome, or the vision. Protective, effective, efficient, and credible. And it's all driving to the vision to be recognized as best in class. And if you listen to that, it's recognized as best in class, which says we need others to identify that we're in fact best in class. We can't just step out and say that we are. We ensure the safe, environmentally responsible development of energy resources for the benefit of all Albertans. That's what the vision is. That's what the outcome is. On our protective line, we've moved on tough requirements around protecting water during hydraulic fracturing. We've moved on public reporting on chemicals used in hydraulic fracturing. We're moving on protecting of groundwater. And we will implement the Tailings Management framework over the next 2 years. So that policy that came out, take a look at it, watch it, because this is how the new process works. Developed by government, with input by with the regulator at the table, and we will implement that over the next couple of years. You take a look at, we're going to try to move into a different way of engaging stakeholders, First Nations and Métis on this, because we're going to trial a different way of dialoguing through this. We moved on Peace River emissions over the last year, and we're very successful at that. We're continuing to implement. On the effectiveness side, we're working on a new innovative play-based regulation. Again, new jurisdictional leading. This is all about cumulative impact, cumulative effects on the ground, based on a region of a play-based region, brand new. This is all about trying to understand the long-term processes for development on the landscape. It's better for First Nations and Métis. It's better for landowners because people will understand what the whole aspect is. That we're starting or trying to get away from the continual knock on the door for every kind of activity that's coming through and continual engagement. We're trying to get on top of this. As I said, it's world leading. And it's all about cumulative impacts on the landscape. On the efficiency side, this is more than just saving money. We have targets in there to save money in the regulatory system. It's more than that. It's really about reducing duplication and complexity in the system, not just for industry, but for the regulator as well. We spend a lot of time doing nugatory work that we shouldn't be doing as a regulator, and we're taking our really limited regulators that we have on the ground, and we're making them focus on that. We need to focus on medium and high risk, and we're going to start doing that. Finally is credibility. As I said, we can be the most protective, effective, and efficient regulator on the planet, bar none. If we're not trusted and we don't have credibility, none of that matters. And that's what we recognized early on, and that's why we're doing this work. We need to figure out what the key attributes of excellence are. That's what you're helping us do. We need to figure out how the AER can adopt them, and more importantly, or as importantly, we need to figure out how to measure them and how to hold ourselves accountable to that. But I have to tell you, we haven't been sitting waiting for this credibility piece to go. We knew we had to move forward on things such as building new and innovative ways to engage with stakeholders. We did that in the Peace River hearing, or the Peace River proceeding on air emissions. That's completely new. That's the new power under RETA that allows the CEO, when faced with a difficult issue, to call a proceeding away from an application. There was no application in front of that panel. It was all about trying to identify a new way to move forward. And it worked. We've got some work to do to finish it off and to work with the folks that live there, and we will do that within the next month. We also moved on transparency. We know transparency is critical. We hear it all the time. We now publish, this is all new, we now publish all decisions online. Again, from the time that RETA came in 2013, this is new. We have expanded our compliance and enforcement reporting on the new compliance dashboard. This is new too, and I encourage you to take a look at this. This dashboard captures all the incidents that occur, probably within 24 or 48 hours, and we post all of the information that we can on that. But it also updates ongoing investigations and lists enforcement actions for non-compliance. So the whole piece is on there right now. This is, as I said, this is all new since the AER began. It's adaptive, and we're happy to take your comments. We get comments that, you know, it's funny, I get it from industry and from other stakeholders that we don't have enough information, we put the information out. What's the response? We have too much information, there's way too much information. So we said, yeah, okay, we get it. We're moving forward through this. We are going to get it better so it's more user-friendly. But again, as I've said earlier, we need your comments on that. So to close off, we know in order to have public confidence to oversee the development of these resources, we need to be trusted and we need to be credible. We need to be excellent. We need to be best in class. We have to hold ourselves, and you need to hold us to a different standard than any other regulator in the world if we're going to have the permission to develop this resource. We need your help. We need your advice, and we will deliver on best in class. There's no question on that. Okay. So again, thanks very much for listening out. We have a lot of work in front of us as a regulator, and this step over the next over this 3-day period is critical for us. This is not drive-by consultation. This isn't consultation. This is in fact an opportunity for us to listen to you. We need your advice. We need your help. Thanks very much.